Some cases from the criminal records are so shocking that they erode one's faith in humanity. Today, we'll delve into one of the most terrifying duos to have operated in Australia. Individuals capable of concealing the fates of dozens of victims, cases that may forever remain in the archives as unsolved. Sian Kingi was born in New Zealand on December 16, 1974. Her family later relocated to Australia. She resided with her family in the small Australian town of Noosa. This town is situated on the coast, in a paradise-like, warm locale. From a young age, the girl was sweet and kind, and she loved sports and dance, especially ballet. She was naturally modest, but possessed the ability to charm everyone she met, which made her very popular among her peers. She was beautiful, tall, with long blonde hair and extraordinary eyes. The schoolgirl definitely stood out from the crowd with her appearance. Unfortunately, this very fact played a fatal role in her life. Friday, November 27, 1987, was a typical weekday. The protagonist of our story had just finished her classes. It was a beautiful, sunny day. The weather was usually ideal at this time of year, a warm sun and a cool breeze, which meant the locals were relaxing at the beach. Sian's mother, Linda Kingi, went to the store. She planned to buy groceries and fabric to sew her daughter a beautiful outfit for her upcoming birthday. The parents were planning a celebration for the occasion and were actively preparing for the event. After school, Sian got on her yellow bicycle. She knew her mother needed help choosing fabric. The woman wanted to purchase exactly what her daughter would like. Therefore, the schoolgirl went to the store immediately after classes. The mother and daughter selected the fabric for the dress. They finished up in the afternoon, right after they had made their purchases. Linda also intended to stop by the bakery, where she wanted to buy baked goods for dinner. However, Sian was already very tired and wanted to go home. Choosing the fabric had seemed very tedious to her. The child asked to be allowed to go home so she could meet her mother later. Linda gave her permission to leave, so the schoolgirl set off on her bicycle on her favorite short route. This was a route she had ridden hundreds of times before. But today, it turned out not to be as safe as usual. In the 80s, Noosa Heads was a quiet, provincial settlement. Here, people knew each other well and were friendly, so the town was considered one of the safest in the area. The Kingi family home was located just a few kilometers from the store, and it would take only a few minutes to get there by bicycle. Linda was confident in the safety of her 12-year-old daughter. After all, nothing bad had ever happened in their peaceful town before. In fact, the mother intended to leave immediately after buying a few groceries, which shouldn't have taken much time either. At 4:45 p.m., Sian got on her bicycle and rode off. The path led the schoolgirl through a park towards home. Linda went in the other direction. Having bought baked goods, she immediately headed home, but by another route in her car. Considering that the schoolgirl wasn't riding too fast, the difference between them was only a matter of minutes. It was assumed that the woman would arrive home just a few minutes after her daughter arrived by bicycle. When Linda returned, she expected to find the yellow bicycle near the house, as well as Sian herself, but the schoolgirl was not at home. At first, this didn't cause the woman any concern, as the girl could have met a friend on the way or popped in to visit someone. The weekend was approaching after a long school week, so teenagers often met after classes, spending time together. The girl had many friends, so she regularly visited someone. Moreover, they had just chosen some beautiful fabric with her mother. The schoolgirl could simply have gone to one of her friends to show it off. There were also plans for a gathering with friends on the weekend, so the heroine of our story might have gone to a couple of future guests to discuss the upcoming events. However, the mother soon became worried. The girl still hadn't returned. Sian was well-behaved and never allowed herself to leave home for long without permission. As a precaution, Linda decided to call several friends whose children her daughter associated with. The woman wanted to make sure that the girl was with them. But, to the mother's horror, no one had seen Sian. By 8 o'clock, the schoolgirl still hadn't shown up at home, despite the fact that this was a small, quiet town with a minimal crime rate. Sian always observed the curfew and never went out after sunset. Naturally, on Friday evenings, people would start relaxing and going out after the work week. So even the safest town could be a very risky place in the dark. Naturally, the adult woman understood this. Ultimately, Linda decided to walk along the path her daughter regularly rode on her bicycle. The mother knew this direction perfectly. The path was the shortest from their house on the outskirts to the town's shops. Together with her husband, they walked along this road and, approximately halfway, found Sian's yellow bicycle lying unattended on the ground. The girl was nowhere to be seen. There were no traces here. However, the abandoned bicycle looked more than suspicious. For the girl, it was her first means of transportation, and she treasured it very much. Sian had asked for it for a long time, and the bicycle was of great value to the schoolgirl. She would never have left it unattended. Unfortunately, they were unable to find the girl nearby. Her parents called out to her, but no one responded. Of course, after that, Linda and her husband decided to go to the police station. The couple went home to get a photograph of their daughter and make sure she hadn't returned. They went to the police with the photograph. The officers took the parents' statement about their daughter's disappearance and immediately declared the child missing. Everyone knew that the town had a close-knit local community with a practically zero crime rate. So it was expected that the girl would be found quickly and that it was just a simple misunderstanding. Perhaps the teenager was spending time with friends or got lost in the forest during a walk. Nevertheless, the parents' words and the circumstances of the event caused great suspicion, which the police officers did not dare to speak about, so as not to upset the parents in advance. One of the officers remembered that not long before this incident, there had already been a kidnapping in their area. The police decided to contact the local media. In the absence of social media and the internet, they had to use classic methods. In the morning newspapers, all the residents of the town saw an announcement about Sian's disappearance. It was assumed that this would allow them to find at least some witness who had seen the 12-year-old schoolgirl the previous evening. Indeed, several people contacted the station and provided the police with information. However, they all claimed that they hadn't seen any suspicious situations. As it turned out, these were witnesses who had paid attention to Linda and Sian when they were choosing the fabric for the future dress. However, no one had seen the girl on her way home, and even more so, no one had been walking along the path at that time. Witnesses provided different information. People tried to emphasize any suspicious facts, such as unfamiliar cars or other residents of the town who might have been nearby and behaving unusually. But no one had seen anyone following Linda and Sian. One of the witnesses told about a dirty white 1973 Holden Kingswood station wagon that had been seen that evening. The person who contacted the police reported that there was a dark-haired man in the car, as well as a stout woman. They were aimlessly driving around the street, as if looking for someone. It was possible that Sian could have approached them. Witnesses had seen the suspicious pair not long before her disappearance. The police officers working on the case analyzed the existing cars in the database. The authorities' field of vision was around 170,000 station wagons in the area, approximately 10,000 of which were white. Thus, the search area increased significantly. They had to become familiar with all the cars in the region and also check the other leads from the callers. This took up significant resources. Dozens of police officers and hundreds of volunteers were involved in the search operation. Many relatives, friends from the family's neighbors, as well as other concerned people, volunteered to participate in the search for the girl. Land and air search methods were used. Photographs of the place where the teenager disappeared were taken, and then they were published in the media. This is a common method that helps to trigger memories associated with the events of that day in the minds of witnesses. Unfortunately, no one was able to provide any valuable information to law enforcement officers. Nevertheless, on Sunday, several new witnesses appeared who actually helped the investigation move off dead center. The first witness was sunbathing near a stream in the forest when an unknown man attacked her. He molested her and tried to drag the victim into his car. It is noteworthy that he was in the white Holden Kingswood station wagon mentioned earlier. The second witness saw this moment and helped the girl fight off the attacker. After that, the man followed this car as its driver tried to escape the scene, but soon lost sight of it. He was able to describe the car in detail and provided the police with a number. The vehicle's license plate showed the number 429. The detectives decided to check this number in the police database. This number was indeed registered in the region. It turned out that the car was owned by a woman named Wilma Beck. Detectives quickly found the address and went to the house where the car owner lived. An elderly man opened the door for the investigators. He confirmed that he knew the owner of the vehicle. According to this person, he was not a relative of Wilma, but his stepson, Barry, turned out to be her husband. They had been married for a year. Barry's description was very similar to the portrait created from the words of the witness who had been attacked near the stream. The suspect's name was Barry John Watts. The police officers had no grounds to arrest, much less bring charges of kidnapping the girl. However, the vehicle owner and her husband were regarded as suspects in this crime. Unfortunately, the man didn't know where the couple was, but he said that they often changed their place of residence, renting housing, and were constantly on the move, which looked strange. 3 days after Sian disappeared, another witness contacted the police. A man again told about the white Holden Kingswood car that had been seen near the stream. He also described the driver as being athletic and a stout woman, who were behaving very suspiciously. An hour after this statement, the police finally finished checking the biographical data of Wilma Beck and Barry Watts. It turned out that shortly before the events began, they had been released from prison in Perth, Western Australia. Both had an extensive criminal history. Just a few weeks before the events began, the couple had moved to Queensland from Perth, as they were trying to evade the police. Both had missed the check-ins they were required to make after their parole. The criminals had come here in their sedan, but almost immediately exchanged it for a white station wagon, which had already appeared in several suspicious episodes. The police realized that they were dealing with dangerous criminals who had committed more than one crime. Among their achievements were armed robberies, break-ins, forgery of documents necessary for obtaining money, fraudulent actions, and all this was only part of the criminal record of hardened criminals. Of course, this was very bad news for the Kingi family. If their daughter had contacted these people, the chances of finding her alive and unharmed were minimal. Barry Watts was 33 years old at the time, and his wife, Wilma, was 43. The woman had 6 children from previous relationships. Both were considered particularly dangerous criminals and were on the police wanted list. Now, the police had to urgently find this couple and check their involvement in the schoolgirl's disappearance. Meanwhile, 6 days after Sian's disappearance, a man named Tim came to the police station with bad news. He said that the previous evening, he had smelled an unpleasant, putrid odor while walking to work through the park. He was running late, so he didn't pay much attention to the event, deciding that some animal had died. The incident on the way back did evoke curiosity, as in the same place, he again felt an unbearable smell of decomposition. Off the road, near the stream, he discovered the body of a teenager. The girl was wearing her school uniform and had blonde hair. The police immediately arrived at the indicated location. There, law enforcement officers found the mutilated body of the schoolgirl. The girl had clearly been sexually assaulted. In addition, there were signs of strangulation with a foreign object found on her neck, as well as 12 stab wounds on her body. 3 blows were immediately inflicted on the heart area, and 2 cut the throat. The girl's spine was broken, and her arms were so disfigured and twisted that the attacker had practically separated them from a body. The schoolgirl's death was very agonizing. The police immediately assumed that they were looking at the missing girl. She was wearing the same clothes and matched her mother's description. In the laboratory, the forensic expert confirmed that the victim found was 12-year-old Sian Kingi. 5 days after this terrible discovery, The child's family and friends came to say goodbye to her at her funeral. At the farewell ceremony, one of her classmates read an excerpt from Peter Pan, implying that his friend would forever remain a child. Flowers were laid along the path near which the tormented girl was found. After the information about what had happened was made public by the media, another woman contacted the police. This was a nurse named Nicole Close. She said that she had also encountered suspicious people in this area who were driving a white station wagon. Once, when the witness had finished her shift at the hospital late in the evening and was moving through the parking lot towards her car, the young woman noticed how a white car had entered the parking lot and, creeping, was moving in her direction. Nicole immediately felt that something was wrong, so she ran to her car and jumped inside, closing the door. The station wagon did not back down and pulled up next to the passenger door, after which a man came out of it. He approached the window and asked for help figuring out a map to tell him how to get to a certain place. The driver looked calm and quite friendly, so the nurse gave in to the persuasion and even got out of the car. She wanted to end this conversation as quickly as possible, as she saw a suspicious-looking woman in the station wagon, and it also seemed to her that there were some ropes lying in the back. In addition, the nurse felt anxious, as if she was in danger. The man behaved very calmly and politely, but with literally every word he took a small step towards the nurse. Nicole explained several times how to drive, but he kept repeating this question, getting closer and closer to her. When there were only a few steps left of the nurse, she saw a stranger walking past them through the parking lot. The driver of the white car also saw him, got distracted, and hesitated. Thanks to this, the witness took advantage of the situation to jump into her car. The nurse closed the door and simply drove away. According to her, this incident occurred on November 2nd, even before Sian disappeared. The investigators did not consider all these stories with the white car a simple coincidence and latched onto this clue. The detective showed the new witness several photographs, and among a series of unfamiliar faces, she unerringly identified Wilma Beck and Barry Watts. But the testimonies of the witnesses did not end there. The next day after this statement, a new eyewitness came to the station and told about another attempted kidnapping. According to him, he saw how a stranger attacked a woman on the street, put a knife to her throat, and tried to drag her into his car. It was again a white station wagon. However, the victim began to resist, and she even managed to injure the attacker's hand with his own knife before the girl could break free and escape. The police contacted the lucky stranger and were able to find fingerprints on her car that belonged to the suspect, Barry Watts. She also identified the pair of villains who were likely involved in kidnappings, rapes, and murders in the area. The police understood that particularly dangerous criminals were at large and threatened the entire district. Therefore, a nationwide Australian alert was issued. Wanted posters were sent out for the two criminals, as well as for the white car that the couple was using. Information about the suspects was made public in the media. It seemed that the criminals had gone into hiding, but now, after the alert, the data was in all police departments across the country. Their capture became a matter of time. In a small town called Lowood, a local electrical worker was installing wiring at height and accidentally discovered a car that matched the description of the wanted criminal station wagon. He remembered it thanks to the media alert he had seen a few days earlier. When he came down, he made sure that the car was indeed wanted by the police. Therefore, he immediately went to the station and pointed out the location of the vehicle on the map. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, it turned out that the criminals had already fled. The police officers were on their trail, but they lost them again. Then, information came in about a money transfer that had been made by the suspects on the way out of New South Wales. The station wagon was tracked to a motel parking lot. Fortunately, when the police arrived, it was still in place. The hotel staff provided access to the fugitive's room. Police officers realized that they were dealing with particularly dangerous criminals who could be in possession of firearms, so they kept their weapons at the ready. Contrary to the officers' expectations, they did not resist and were arrested. In the motel room, the police found wigs, hair dye, and a hair clipper. This indicated that the couple had been trying to change their appearance to successfully hide from the police. The interrogation of the suspects lasted about 12 hours. During this time, Barry Watts could not be broken. The man said nothing to the police, and they clearly had a conspiracy with his wife, so that she would stick to the same version and not give out any valuable information. Despite this, Wilma Beck was quickly broken. The woman believed that she could thus mitigate her sentence, so she told the authorities a story that made the blood run cold in their veins. According to the criminal, on November 27th, she was wandering the streets of the city with her husband. The reason was the search for a new victim, as Barry was obsessed with violence against women. In particular, he loved victims much younger than himself. His wife was 10 years older and was far from his ideals. So to satisfy his unhealthy lust, Barry began to rape and kill. The criminal always chose those who were younger and more beautiful, who matched his taste. And Wilma just followed his lead, as she was afraid of breaking up the relationship and divorce. At least, that's what she claimed. On that fateful day, Barry decided to find a girl at all costs and be her first man, and his wife was supposed to help kidnap the child, and she agreed to do it. That Friday morning, they had been driving around the area for several hours. The criminals believed that catching a girl would not be difficult. However, in reality, most of the potential victims were in company. It was impossible to secretly kidnap one of them. Initially, Barry himself tried to talk to several victims, but one way or another, they ran away. Finally, the criminal was struck by an idea, because he inspires much less trust than his wife. So he decided to use Wilma as bait to lure the victim. After that, they stopped not far from the local park and went for a walk. On the path, the criminals saw an attractive girl who was slowly riding her yellow bicycle. Barry chose her, and Wilma waved her hand in a friendly way. The unsuspecting schoolgirl stopped. The woman began to invent a story that she was trying to find her poodle. Then she asked the girl for help, as it was difficult for her to catch the dog. The girl was distracted and was talking to Wilma, as she was kind by nature and was trying to help. At that moment, Barry attacked Sian from behind. He covered her mouth with his hand and dragged her into his dirty car. Here, the criminal taped her and tied her up. Wilma remained in the back seat, and her husband got behind the wheel. Together, they drove 12 kilometers from the abduction site, stopping in the forest. Here, the fiend spread a large blanket and dragged the girl onto it. For several hours, he enacted his most depraved fantasies. Barry's wife recounted that the girl never cried during these tortures. She was very brave, endured everything stoically, and obediently complied, doing whatever the criminal instructed, seemingly hoping for release. Wilma also believed that Sian didn't necessarily need to be killed and could simply be left there when her husband was done. However, he never intended to let her live from the start. To indulge his sick fantasies, the man began to strangle the schoolgirl and stab her. The resulting injuries were fatal for the 12-year-old girl, and Wilma simply watched the entire time. The woman reported that the belt used to strangle the girl, along with the blanket and some other items, had been discarded nearby in the stream. The police went to the indicated location, and everything the woman had described was indeed discovered. At the presumed site of the rape and murder, they found blonde hair, likely belonging to Sian. Wilma's confession took up 28 pages, where she described in detail all the horrors the heroine of the story endured before she died. Barry couldn't be broken, but he was furious when he learned about his wife's confession. To ensure the man's imprisonment, investigators wanted to obtain his confession, but it was impossible to break him. Then, the officers went for a rather complex method. It was decided to place an undercover agent in the temporary detention cell where Barry would be held. He would spend all the time with him, just like a regular inmate. The undercover agent's task was to get acquainted and establish friendly relations with the criminal, which should have helped to obtain a confession. A 27-year-old police officer was chosen for this dangerous mission. Later, He noted that it was one of the most difficult cases in his practice. He himself had children, and communicating with such a monster was very difficult for him. The police officer had to play the role of a friendly inmate, support the conversation, and ultimately listen to a confession of the most brutal murder of a schoolgirl without showing that he was disgusted. Throughout the entire period of performing this task, the policeman struggled to cope with the desire to break Barry's neck. Afterwards, he was so emotionally exhausted that he took a 3-month sick leave to recover. But this mission failed. They couldn't get a confession. The scale of this monster's cruelty shocked everyone. Forensic experts called Sian's murder the most gruesome case in their practice. However, Barry did not give up and tried with all his might to avoid punishment. During one of their meetings with his wife, he subtly hinted that the woman should take her own life before the trial to avoid testifying against him, or she wouldn't fare well. Under state law, in this case, the witness's testimony would not have had legal force. In general, he communicated with his wife very carefully choosing his words so that the authorities could not use the telephone dialogue to prove his guilt. Fortunately, Wilma did not listen to her husband and save her life. When the couple was brought to court, about 200 people gathered at the entrance, wanting to look into the eyes of the brutal murderers who had terrorized the area with attempted kidnappings and murders. There was a high probability that people would try to commit vigilante justice against the murderers. But instead, to the surprise of law enforcement officers, when these monsters were led through the crowd, everyone applauded. Local residents were happy that the police had secured the streets. One of the officers even shed a tear, touched by such a reaction. At the trial, Wilma testified against her husband, presenting him as a real monster. At the same time, she tried to justify herself and show that she had been forced into this cruel case. In fact, there was every reason to believe that the woman had participated in all of this voluntarily. She herself told an interesting fact, according to which she was connected with another serial killer, convicted in Perth. In prison, she met Catherine Burney, who was involved in murders with her boyfriend. The hardened criminal said that sex during murder was the strongest and most pleasant experience in her life. It was after she told Barry about it that he became obsessed with this idea. On October 20th, 1988, the jury went to discuss the verdict. It took the jurors 3 hours to find the criminals guilty. Wilma Beck received 10 years for kidnapping, 3 years for rape, and life imprisonment for murder. However, due to cooperation with the prosecution, she retained a right to parole. The discussion of the verdict for Barry took 6 hours. The fiend was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and rape. He received life imprisonment without the right to parole. His case is placed in an archive, not subject to release. However, the story of this couple did not end there. In prison, Barry began to boast about his criminal achievements and told his cellmates that he was involved in another similar crime. The criminal told about the murder of 31-year-old teacher Helen Marie Finney, who disappeared on October 29, 1987. It turned out that Wilma was also involved in this episode. It was established that during an attempt to rob Helen's car, Barry caught her. Wilma admitted that she saw how her husband murdered the teacher, after which they threw the body into the trunk and dumped it in a landfill near Brisbane. At the same time, Barry fell silent. As the police tried to talk to him, he didn't give any information about the second victim, Helen Finney, apparently because he hoped to challenge the verdict in the Sian case in the future. However, in 2007, he was persuaded to confess to Sian's murder. The criminal confirmed that he had killed her. He described in detail what happened. His story matched his wife's testimony. Wilma Beck suffered from attacks by her cellmates because of the article she was serving time for. She was regularly beaten and once seriously injured, suffering a blow to the head with a can. To prevent the inmate from being beaten to death, she was transferred to a safer correctional center. Here, she embraced Christianity and seemed to have embarked on the path of correction. The woman applied for parole 3 times, but each time she was denied. In 2007, she divorced her killer husband. The woman had serious health problems. She suffered from excess weight and diabetes. In 2008, her condition deteriorated so much that doctors were forced to put her into a medically induced coma immediately after heart surgery. The police hoped that on her deathbed, she would provide a few more confessions about other crimes. This couple was suspected of a much larger number of kidnappings, rapes, and murders committed in the area. Unfortunately, she passed away without regaining consciousness at the age of 64, taking with her to the grave all the information about the criminal activities of these cruel beings. Of course, Barry still carries this heavy burden, but law enforcement officers are confident that the criminal will never confess to other crimes.